Vaccine passports seem inevitably on the horizon, whether we like them or not. The US continues to fail in achieving unity, and companies push ahead on net zero carbon while governments struggle. My name's Mallen Baker. This is the Mallen Baker Show. The UK government has said that it does not intend to bring in vaccine passports. But will it be left with a choice? The question's emerging as a central one as we look ahead to what may turn out to be the most difficult aspect of the pandemic, actually coming out of it. The good news is that things are moving in the right direction. In the UK, early data seen by ministers reportedly suggests that vaccinations are cutting illness by around 2/3, cutting hospital admissions and deaths even more. Everyone above 50, and even though I'm just a young thing, that's going to include me, will have had the opportunity to be vaccinated by March the 24th. At that point it slows down because a lot of the second jabs start to get administered. I predicted before that this next bit would be the most difficult for the same reason that prisoners report that the last few weeks of a sentence can be the most unbearable. The end is nearly in sight, but not quite yet. And it doesn't help that the glimmers of light on the horizon are constantly pushed onto front page headlines, only to then be snatched away. Pubs may reopen in April rather than May, we're told, but then we hear they may not be allowed to serve alcohol because someone thinks micromanaging those sorts of details is fun, I suppose. Douglas Murray responded in The Spectator, "This cannot be our best hope, that if everyone behaves themselves and everything goes according to plan, then we might be allowed to drink an orange juice in public sometime after Easter. This horizon is not sufficiently motivating." The British Medical Journal reported that experts are demanding an urgent inquiry into why alcohol-related deaths hit record numbers in the first 9 months of 2020. I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that they're not going to have to press gang only geniuses onto that inquiry. Frustration is building up. Resentment is everywhere, looking for targets. A majority of the public told pollsters that the new 10-year prison sentence for those sneaking around quarantine restrictions is either just about right or else way too lenient. We now have a mix of people, some breaking out of enforced isolation in frustration, and others who are scared to come out ever again under any foreseeable circumstances, and who will visit mighty wrath upon the first group. In that situation, the UK's position of not wanting to introduce national vaccine passports is going to come under a lot of pressure. Internally, but also externally. Greece has proposed a system of vaccine passports to enable tourists to visit there. Once again, Denmark will start issuing vaccine passports this month, followed by Sweden. Joe Biden is evaluating possibilities in the US, Spain, Italy, Cyprus and Malta, all of them keen to see tourism back. They are big fans. Estonia is working with the World Health Organization on a project to create standardized digital schemes that could become the global gold standard. If your government doesn't impose a scheme that everywhere you want to go, foreign holidays, music venues, maybe even restaurants, all of them require it, well, it's more or less the same thing. In this regard, it's interesting to look at Israel, which, since it's further ahead than anyone else in its vaccination programme, is that much deeper into the dilemmas of the emergence from the crisis. Using only the Pfizer vaccine, whose 2 doses 3 weeks apart provide 93% protection, the government has now fully vaccinated almost 1/3 of its 9 million population. Clalit, the largest of Israel's 4 healthcare providers, looked at 600,000 people who had been vaccinated and then compared them with an equal number that hadn't, and found a 92% drop in cases. This graph shows the UK's healthy drop in cases and death rates. You'd assume that Israel's would be even more steep. But in truth, although there's a decline, no it isn't. Until last week, it had been in lockdown since January the 8th, but during that time, its hospitals were close to being overwhelmed as infections went sky high, peaking at more than 8,000 new cases. Professor Nadav Davidovich, head of public health at Ben Gurion University, suggested that the reason came down to two things. One, the UK variant is at work and it's more powerful, as we know. And two, Israelis basically were widely ignoring lockdown rules. Not just the ultra-Orthodox Jews who have been holding traditional family events attended by hundreds or even thousands of people, but also the rest of the population, which has been succumbing to so-called lockdown fatigue. Partly as a result of the fact that government has been turning a blind eye to non-compliance, especially by the politically favoured. Now that more than 80% of the over 60s are vaccinated in Israel, the virus is increasingly making younger people seriously ill. Almost 75% of people diagnosed last weekend were under 40. And this is where the conflict emerges that we can expect in our own societies very soon. Thorny questions about rights, obligations and the greater good. And the vehicle for this challenge is a vaccine passport, or in Israel's case, a green badge scheme. Gyms, sports events, hotels, swimming pools, all sorts of things are reopening, soon to be followed by restaurants, event venues and conferences, but only for green badge holders. The Health Minister, Yuli Edelstein, put the brutal pressure of it up front. Whoever does not get vaccinated will be left behind. In the UK, you can see backbench Conservative ministers pushing the opposite, arguing that restrictions must be lifted rapidly so that we can get the economy back to normal. And if there was going to be some sort of payoff from having been quick off the mark, running a fleet-of-foot vaccination programme, you'd kind of think that would be it, because the UK economy has been one of the hardest hit in the world. But various big guns are lining up in opposition. The former Prime Minister Tony Blair's Institute just released a report saying that the complete lifting of restrictions may not be safe until there are no known cases of coronavirus in Britain. It says that even then, society must remain poised for rapid reimposition of local restrictions, mass testing and, you guessed it, vaccine passports. A rapid lifting of restrictions, according to the Blair report, would risk a rise in hospital admissions, increase the chance of more virus mutations, and would actually harm, not help, the economy. And it concluded like this. Once the vaccination rollout is complete, the degree to which life will be able to return to normal is very sensitive to the proportion of the population covered and the effectiveness of the vaccines in preventing transmission. While there are positive signs, it is far from clear it will be possible to remove all restrictions without having in place a comprehensive containment infrastructure involving digital health credentials, better incentives for self-isolation and widespread availability of rapid testing. Tony Blair himself added, the arguments against it really don't add up. And the cracks have started becoming evident in the government itself. Britain's Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab told a radio interviewer that we could get to a position where people have to show evidence of vaccination to enter bars and grocery stores. That didn't go down tremendously well with others in his own party. It doesn't play that well in non-tourism dependent countries in Europe either, given how much further behind the EU's vaccination programme is. Both Germany and France reject the concept, and most African nations are unlikely to see mass vaccinations before 2023. Meanwhile, looking back to Israel, a new phenomenon has also sprung to life, namely a thriving black market for forged green badges. Whoever would have anticipated it? Now, in a moment, we'll get on to the rest of the week's news, but first, I've done a number of videos on this channel extolling the virtues of capitalism. Not without flaws, not without problems to solve, but basically the best system the human race has discovered so far for creating wealth and raising people out of poverty. And when I've suggested such a thing, I often get kickback from those who feel capitalism is at its heart unfair, that it creates inequality, and that inequality is more important than any other single aspect. It's an interesting point, but there are lots of reasons why inequality is unavoidable in the human race. It has been so throughout history, and it will always remain so, hence requiring us to engage with it in a smarter way. So next week, I'll be launching a video on this channel that covers this very question: how the human race became unequal, and what should, if anything, be done about it. That will be going live on here on Monday next week, 7 PM UK time. Join me then. This week, we discovered that America can triumphantly place a sophisticated rover on the surface of Mars, but somehow can't provide heat and fresh water to people in Texas when the weather's a bit cold. If only the heat of controversy was literal heat, it might not have been a problem, as people argued passionately about whose favourite source of energy was really to blame. The truth is, of course, that it can't be the fault of the technology. It comes down to systems and it comes down to institutions. Federal regulators apparently warned that the Texas system was vulnerable to cold conditions back in 2011 when a similar freeze hit the state. The state's grid operator, ERCOT, has said that it doesn't have the power to force companies to harden their facilities. The Texas power grid is also independent, deliberately so backup power from other states couldn't be fed in a crisis, as is often the case when other states struggle. These seem like they should be solvable problems, given that states that get hit all the time by cold weather seem to manage relatively fine. On the political front, the Biden administration continues to sow a degree of confusion about whether at heart it's really the moderate, sensible, democratic, safe pair of hands that were advertised, or whether it's really in control of the radicals. In a town hall this week, Joe Biden said that the country was much less divided than people think. The nation is not divided. You go out there and take a look and talk to people. You have fringes on both ends, but it's not nearly as divided as we make it out to be. Earlier in the discussion, he declined responding to a question from the moderator about Donald Trump, saying that for 4 years people had heard nothing but Trump, and now he wanted them to hear about the American people instead. Which sounds like a commitment to empathy with all of those people, triumph over ideology. That would be the way to unite people outside of the activist bubbles, after all. But is that really the consistent message? If you want a sense of how the administration's ideology might be triumphing over its empathy for the American people, there was this telling example this week from a video with Press Secretary Jan Psaki.
What is President Biden doing for my small business? First and foremost, he nominated a woman to lead the Small Business Administration who formerly worked there. Second thing is he signed an executive order to make it easier for minority-owned small businesses to get access to the funding that they need. And third is that in the American Rescue Plan, there's currently about $60 billion to help a range of small businesses get access to additional funds.
How deep in your ideological bunker do you have to be to think that a good answer to the question, what are you doing to help my business, is to say you've appointed a woman and you're channeling business support to people on the basis of their skin colour? If empathy for people means empathy for favoured groups in the intersectional coalition approved on the left fringes, that is going to stoke resentment and backlash, not a great deal of unity. If it turns out to be the norm rather than a momentary lapse, it's one of the reasons why, if Trump and the Republicans manage not to self-harm further over the coming 4 years, he or they could be straight back in the White House in 2024. Self-harm is, however, what seems to be on the top of their list of things to do. The fighting between Trump loyalists and the rest picked up a new gear this week with a particular focus on Mitch McConnell, whose post-impeachment speech seems to have been a particular burning of the boats. But for all that McConnell is the long-established, savvy political operator, the truth is that even post-January the 6th, Trump's hold of the party has been confirmed as being unshakably tight. 2/3 of Republicans have said that they still want Trump to lead the party, which guarantees that plenty of those with a keen eye to which side their bread is buttered on will be lining up alongside him as well. Something that former ambassador to the UN Nikki Haley is finding out. Her interest in running for president in 2024 is widely known. Her pitch is basically that she would represent the bits that you liked about Trump without the bits that you didn't. Not many people are buying that, and the point is that with Trump, nothing short of total loyalty seems to be tolerated. Trump and Haley haven't spoken since she criticised him following January the 6th. The anti-Trumpers are gearing up to fight back. A national anti-Trump group is launching a $1 million ad campaign to support Republicans in Congress who voted to impeach or convict. TV slots will air on Fox News and they'll also place billboards. And all of this might be why a poll this week has found that there's a high point of support for the idea of a third party in US politics. You'll remember that last week I reported that moderate Republicans had been meeting to discuss the idea of a breakaway party. To be fair, the idea has had pretty solid support since 2013, but the events of January 2021 clearly gave an additional nudge. If it's broken down by party affiliation, it's not surprising you find it's on the Republican side where the interest has suddenly been sharpened. Indeed, reportedly, a number of Democrats are celebrating the idea, assuming that any such split must result in a period of uninterrupted power for themselves. Well, maybe. If the thought of that meant they felt they could now at last afford to give rein to their more radical elements, I still think they might find moderates from both sides coalescing in that middle. Now, I've seen these things numerous times before in the UK as well as in the US. It usually doesn't actually happen. However, the logic for it is probably stronger now than it's been for many decades, so never say never. In the meantime, in Europe and the UK, various businesses have been announcing their progress on the net zero carbon route. Ford said it would only be selling electrical vehicles in Europe from 2030, an announcement that came just a couple of days after a similar one by Jaguar with a target date of 2025. Jaguar, of course, is a low-volume premium brand, so the practicalities of the earlier shift work in its favour there. Ford has said that it's going to invest over $22 billion globally in the next 4 years on the transition to electric vehicles. Meanwhile, it's not so high profile, but it's arguably more important. The shipping company Maersk has said that it will have its first liner fueled by e-methanol by 2023. Which is 7 years earlier than it originally thought would be possible. Methanol might end up being the best fuel for the shipping sector since it's liquid at room temperature, unlike hydrogen. Even if businesses are pushing ahead, governments are not always quite keeping pace. The UK's flagship £1.5 billion Green Homes Grant Scheme, a programme that was to offer 600,000 homes up to 2/3 of the cost for energy efficiency improvements, that is to be scrapped after only a fraction of the grants were actually issued. Ministers had quoted lack of take-up, although critics said the scheme was difficult to apply for, the administration of the grants were completely chaotic. Installers had to lay off staff because of the delays in being able to start work. Just in case you looked at the UK's vaccination programme and concluded that meant governments are actually good at pushing programmes rapidly to scale, nope, the laws of gravity just kicked in and it's government as usual. Also, just 2 days after I released a video on this channel pointing out how susceptible wind farms are to local opposition, the approval for a huge offshore wind farm off the coast of Norfolk has been overturned after a local challenge. The scheme for 158 turbines, about 30 miles offshore, would have generated enough electricity to power 2 million homes. But it would also have needed a 37-mile cable from landfall to a new substation, and that was the impact that led to the opposition. Whether it rests there is another thing. The company has said that it is planning its next move. Now, in a minute, we'll reply to a couple of comments and move on to the final thought for the week. But first, next week I will be having a second go at a live stream, starting with some initial thoughts on the topical issues of the day or some other points of interest that won't make it into next week's end of the week video. And then I'll go through as many of the questions as you've been able to ask in the chat as time permits. I think the technical issues there were the first time out have now been resolved. Only one way to find out, and there'll be no safety net. How exciting does it get? Join me for that on Wednesday next week at 7 p.m. UK time. See you there. Lots of positive comments on the COVID origin video. Thanks to all for those. One commenter added this. My friend raised the good point that there is also a propaganda effort by some to demonise China. On a topic as politicised as this, it's incredibly difficult to be certain about anything, but your conclusion is spot on. Blame doesn't need to be attributed. It's a thorny area. The truth is that China has an authoritarian government, and it only has to behave in exactly the way that every previous similar government has behaved in history for there to be many things to criticise on a day-to-day basis. But as the world becomes more polarised, the danger of such things slipping from something based on an analysis based on evidence to something where malign intent is assumed, that's a hard thing to manage. Not least because citizens of the countries concerned will often feel outraged, as though the whole country, not just its government, is under attack. Which, of course, is the sort of propaganda line that authoritarians will always encourage, because unity in the face of a hostile outsider is always a lever that they've historically used. I've seen it from a couple of Russian viewers who challenged the idea that, for instance, that Russia was behind the Novichok attacks. But the investigative website Bellingcat provided pretty solid evidence linking the Russian Secret Service to the attacks in the UK. No government seemed in doubt that the same was the case for the attack on Navalny recently. Sometimes you just got to call it the way it is, obviously, because there are genuine geopolitical struggles going on, and you have to be able to call them by their name. To talk about what the evidence suggests, that isn't in itself to demonise the combatants. Speaking of combatants, in my video on wind turbines, I predicted that champions of one side or the other would be berating me in the comments for not including all the items on the pros and cons list that they felt should be on their side. Well, that was the safest prediction I've made so far in 2021. Mostly there were things like this. You haven't even touched upon the question of materials and manufacturing issues, not to mention recycling problems that wind turbines generate. Of course, I didn't include those impacts for any of the energy sources. My impression is that they all have significant but manageable impacts in that sense. It becomes an argument against a particular brand of environmentalists who think that wind and solar power are as clean can be and have no bad impact at all. Of course, that wasn't my argument, and in the modern era, there's probably fewer of those people left than you think. In any case, thanks to all of those who added thoughtful, constructive thoughts in a similar vein. Having moved on to 3 videos per week, I'm not getting the chance to reply to as many as I would like, but I do read them all. I try to, as far as YouTube's slightly flawed comment system will permit, because I'm forever going back to old videos and finding that people replied to me on something and I didn't get notification of it and so on. Apologies if that's affected you, but I do appreciate the comments. I do try to read them all that I receive on all of these videos. This week, Sir William Macpherson passed away at the age of 94. He was most famous for presiding over the inquiry into the Metropolitan Police over the Stephen Lawrence case, which concluded that the police had been institutionally racist. He was extremely capable and well-intentioned. Lots of it came from the report, no doubt made policing in London better. But you can also trace back to the Macpherson report certain initiatives that are turning into a troublesome legacy. The report introduced the concept of a non-crime hate incident, which we're now seeing increasingly used to register a black mark against someone without due process or appeal based on what someone decided was a hate incident, which can sometimes take the form of, having the wrong opinion on current debates such as those concerning trans issues. Its original rationale was the idea that such incidents could be the precursor to more serious criminal offending, and it was framed in the context of an awful violent incident that had taken place. But definitions shift over time, and it doesn't seem that there's anything so trivial today that somebody won't claim to have been a hate incident, which is probably why there have been 120,000 such incidents recorded over the last 5 years. The Macpherson report also redefined a racist incident. A racist incident is any incident which is perceived to be racist by the victim or any other person. That definition means that any incident, whatever might have been the intent, can be defined as racist so long as someone is minded to claim that it was. That was the beginning of a gentle but extremely slippery slope, undermining the principle that the purpose of law is to establish the facts and that intent matters. We are further down the slope now, and there are many more instances of believing the victim without proper evidence that we've seen. It was the UK foundation on which much has flowed to erode the old age legal principle of the presumption of innocence. Now, there's nothing inevitable about this, and maybe we've seen the beginnings of a pushback from the government, but there need to be some pretty fundamental shifts. The language of hate is all too ill-defined, and it should be based on something more demonstrably focused on actual harm, such as discrimination. Personally, I would happily see the abolition of non-crime hate incidents. If that's a step too far, then people should at least be notified if one is noted against them, and they should have the ability to appeal against it. The passing of Sir William Macpherson is a reminder that some of these things that have gone so far off the rails recently had noble beginnings, noble aims at the time of genuine racist violence. But we should now be able to see the end result of undermining basic legal principles that have been at the heart of the common law for centuries. It's just not good. We should recognise the huge qualities of Sir William and then quietly and judiciously reverse course. That's all for this week. YouTube briefly demonetised my video on the origins of the virus this week, although they reinstated it on appeal after it had its first 1,000 views. A reminder as always that you tread a fine line with the algorithm and the potential censors when you look at some of these issues. Just one reason why I thank again and celebrate the good people who support this show on Patreon. Without their support, it wouldn't be possible to commit the time to producing 3 videos per week, or indeed to tackle those important issues that YouTube advertisers might be squeamish to be seen alongside. If you would like to join them in supporting the independent, fact-focused and non-ideological content that I aim to produce here, please go to patreon.com/Mallen Baker. There have been a number of you that have done that this month, and it is always appreciated. Either way, have a great week. My name's Mallen Baker. This is The Mallen Baker Show.